Sabrina was 34 years old, and her life followed a simple rule: work hard, keep her head down, and avoid trouble. She worked at a large company where titles mattered, rules were strict, and mistakes were remembered. She did not earn much money, but she was careful. Her clothes were always clean, neatly pressed, and modest. She did not wear bright colors or expensive accessories. Sabrina did not want attention. Attention made problems, and problems could cost her job. At the office, Sabrina was known as a quiet worker. She arrived on time, completed her tasks carefully, and rarely spoke unless spoken to. Her desk was always tidy. Files were aligned. Pens were placed in a straight line. For Sabrina, order meant safety. Work was not just a job, it was her protection in a world that felt uncertain. Her boss, Richard, was 42 years old. He was a man people noticed immediately. He wore tailored suits, walked quickly, and spoke with authority. Most employees lowered their voices when he passed. Richard did not smile often, and when he did, it felt calculated. To many, he was intimidating. To Sabrina, he was someone she respected and feared at the same time. At first, Richard barely noticed her. Or at least, that was what she believed. Then, slowly, things changed. He began stopping by her desk more often. At first, it was about work, short questions, quick checks, nothing unusual. But over time, Sabrina started to feel his eyes on her longer than necessary. When he spoke, he stood too close. His gaze lingered. It made her uncomfortable, but she told herself she was imagining things. He was her boss. She was just an employee. One afternoon, Richard stopped at her desk and did not leave right away. He looked at her reports, nodded, then looked directly at her face. "Sabrina," he said calmly, "you work very hard here. You always do good work." She smiled politely, unsure how to respond. Then he added, in a lower voice, "You deserve more for your hard work." Those words followed her home that night. You deserve more. What did that mean? A raise? Recognition? Or something else? Sabrina lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She did not like uncertainty. Uncertainty felt dangerous. She tried to tell herself it was nothing, just a comment from a boss. Still, her sleep was restless. A few days later, an email arrived in her inbox. Richard asked her to come to his office. The subject line was simple: salary discussion. Sabrina's heart began to beat faster. A raise would change everything for her. It would mean security, relief, and fewer sleepless nights. She stood up, smoothed her skirt, took a deep breath, and walked toward his office, unaware that this conversation would open a door she never meant to walk through. Richard's office felt colder than usual that afternoon, even though nothing about the room had changed. When Sabrina sat across from him, hands folded tightly on her lap, she tried to focus only on his words. He talked about her performance, her discipline, how she never caused problems and always delivered results. He said she was one of the most reliable employees he had ever managed. Hearing that made her chest loosen just a little. Praise was rare in that building, especially from a man like Richard. Then he leaned back in his chair and said calmly that she deserved a raise. Not someday. Soon. The word soon echoed in Sabrina's head like a promise she wanted badly to believe. Extra money meant security, less fear every month, fewer sleepless nights counting bills. She thanked him, trying to sound professional, but her voice trembled slightly. Richard noticed. He smiled, just briefly, and suggested they continue the conversation over dinner. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere nicer. Sabrina hesitated. Dinner with her boss felt wrong, but refusing felt dangerous. She worried about how it might look, how it might affect her job. In the end, fear made the decision for her. She nodded. The restaurant by the sea was nothing like the office. Soft lights reflected on the water outside. The sound of waves replaced the noise of keyboards and phones. Richard looked different without his suit jacket, more relaxed, almost charming. He told her she looked beautiful, and she laughed awkwardly, and used to hearing words like that directed at her. At first, they talked about work, numbers, deadlines, plans. But slowly the topic shifted. Richard spoke about loneliness, about long nights alone in his apartment, about feeling unseen despite his position. Sabrina listened. She had spent years feeling invisible herself. When Richard said she was different, that she understood him, something inside her softened. She felt chosen. Special. When his hand touched hers on the table, she noticed every detail, the warmth of his skin, the way her heart sped up. She knew she should pull away. She didn't. Silence filled the space where a boundary should have been. After dinner, Richard suggested going to his apartment to talk more. Sabrina told herself she could still say no, that she was in control. But the sea air, the compliments, the hope of change all blurred together. She followed him. That night felt unreal. Like stepping into another life where she was wanted and protected. When Richard whispered that he would take care of her, she wanted to believe him. As she lay awake beside him, she told herself this was not a mistake. This was the beginning of something better. The morning light came softly through the curtains of Richard's apartment, but Sabrina woke with a strange weight in her chest. For a few seconds, she stayed still, listening to the quiet, trying to understand how she felt. Beside her, Richard was awake. He looked calm, almost distant, as if the night before had already moved into the past. He smiled briefly and said, "Don't worry, Sabrina. I'll take care of you." The words sounded gentle, but they were vague, like a promise without a shape. She wanted to ask what he meant, but she didn't. She nodded, holding on to the hope that this meant safety, growth, maybe even respect. At the office later that morning, reality began to crack that hope. Richard walked in wearing his usual sharp suit, his face serious, professional. He passed Sabrina's desk without slowing down. No smile. No look. When he finally spoke to her, it was only about numbers, deadlines, and reports. His voice was cold, formal, exactly like it had been before dinner by the sea. Sabrina told herself he was just being careful. This was work, after all. Days passed. Then weeks. The promised salary discussion never came. The raise was never mentioned. Each time Sabrina gathered the courage to ask, Richard replied with the same short sentence, "Be patient. These things take time." His eyes never met hers. In meetings, he spoke to everyone except her. When she entered a room, conversations stopped. When she left, whispers followed. The silence between them grew heavier than any argument could have been. At night, Sabrina replayed everything in her mind. The dinner. The compliments. The way he made her feel chosen. And then the morning after. The distance. The coldness. Slowly, painfully, the truth began to form. Richard had not crossed a line by accident. He had known exactly where it would lead. And once he got what he wanted, he stepped back into his power, leaving her alone to carry the weight of it. Sabrina felt a deep mix of shame and anger, but also clarity. She stopped waiting for his words. She stopped hoping for explanations that would never come. One afternoon, as she sat at her desk staring at her computer without seeing it, she made a decision. She would not stay silent anymore. She would go to his office, look him in the eye, and ask the question she had been avoiding. Not about feelings. Not about the night. But about the promise that had changed everything. Sabrina stood outside Richard's office for a long moment before knocking. Her hands were cold, but her mind was clear. She had waited long enough. When he told her to come in, his voice was flat, almost annoyed. He did not look up from his computer at first. "I want to talk about my salary," Sabrina said, keeping her voice steady. "You promised we would discuss it. You said I deserved more." Richard finally leaned back in his chair. His expression changed, not to guilt, but to irritation. "Sabrina, this is not appropriate," he replied. "You are mixing personal matters with work. That's unprofessional." The words hit her hard. She felt her chest tighten. "You invited me to dinner," she said quietly. You told me things would change. You made promises. Richard stood up. His tone became sharp, controlled, and cold. Enough, he said. This conversation is over. Go back to your desk. I won't discuss this again. In that moment, Sabrina understood the truth. He was not confused. He was not misunderstood. He was choosing his power. She walked out of his office with tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to cry in front of him. Over the next few days, the office atmosphere changed. Conversations stopped when Sabrina walked by. She noticed whispers, quick looks, and silence. Someone had seen them together. Someone had talked. The story moved faster than the truth ever could. Then one afternoon, she received an email from HR. Miss Harper asked her to come in for a meeting. Sabrina's heart raced, but she knew what she had to do. Sitting across from HR, she took a deep breath and told the truth. She spoke about the dinner, the promises, the night at Richard's apartment, and the silence afterward. She did not exaggerate. She did not hide anything. An investigation followed. Richard denied everything at first, but messages he had sent Sabrina were found. The tone, the timing, the implication, there was no denying it. Within weeks, Richard was fired. His office was emptied. His name disappeared from the company website. But the end of Richard was not the end of Sabrina's pain. Instead of support, she faced blame. Colleagues avoided her. Some looked at her with anger, others with judgment. In their eyes, she was the reason the company had a scandal. A week later, a letter arrived. The company thanked her for her service, then explained they were ending her contract to protect the company's image. No apology. No acknowledgement of what she had endured. As Sabrina read the letter, her hands shook. She had told the truth, and it had cost her everything. Losing the job felt like falling through the floor. One moment, Sabrina was an employee with routines and structure. The next, she was a woman sitting alone in her apartment, staring at a wall that felt too close. The silence was heavy. No emails to answer. No desk to return to. Only questions that played again and again in her mind. How did I let this happen? Why didn't I stop it sooner? Why did I believe him? For days, she blamed herself. She replayed every moment, every look, every word. She told herself she had been weak. She told herself this was her punishment. But slowly, another truth began to surface, quiet but firm. Her biggest mistake was not trusting Richard. Her biggest mistake was doubting her own worth. She had believed she needed someone powerful to recognize her value, when her value had been there all along. The next month was one of the hardest periods of her life. Sabrina sent out resumes every morning and received silence most afternoons. Some interviews ended politely, others ended before they truly began. There were nights she cried from fear, wondering if this story would follow her forever. But each morning, she still woke up, dressed neatly as always, and tried again. Not because she was confident, but because she refused to disappear. Eventually, she found a new position at a smaller company. Her new manager, Mr. Terry, was different from Richard in every way that mattered. He spoke calmly. He listened. He discussed work clearly and never crossed lines. When he praised her performance, it was public and professional. When he talked about growth, it was written in clear terms, not whispered promises. For the first time in a long while, Sabrina felt safe. As weeks passed, something inside her changed. She no longer waited for approval. She asked questions. She spoke up in meetings. She trusted her skills. She understood that respect should never come with conditions. Power mixed with vague promises was dangerous, but clarity and boundaries were strength. Looking back, Sabrina no longer saw herself as a victim. She saw herself as someone who learned a hard lesson and survived it. She learned that her value was not something to be given by a boss, a title, or a smile across a desk. Her value was something she carried within herself. And that was her real strength. If this story made you reflect on power, trust, and self-worth, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more emotional English stories.